and welcome to today's roundtable discussion hosted by the National Volunteer Fire Council. My name is Ken Willett, and I'll be serving as the facilitator of the discussion today. And joining me is PJ Norwood and Casey Grant. And today we're going to be talking about immersive learning and the technologies that support immersive learning. The three of us have been looking at this topic from varied angles for the past several years. Casey has been involved in some cutting-edge research, starting from a research project, a seminal research project several years ago down for the National Institute of Science and Technology that started looking at the smart firefighter and the enabling of firefighters' abilities to do their mission through leveraging technology. At that time, the technology focus was more on equipment and whatnot, but there also was a discussion about training. And that has evolved through a course of years to Casey's lead role in several AFG-funded projects that I'll be talking about shortly. PJ is the director of the Connecticut State Fire Academy. He's going on his third year in that role, I believe. And PJ has been an innovator in fire service training and using immersive learning tools and other simulations to really move the fire service into understanding fire dynamics, how fire grows, but more importantly, to training the firefighter to be safe and to utilize research-driven knowledge to do their job. My connection to this goes with serving as the executive director of the North American Fire Training Directors, and prior to that, working at NFPA with Casey, and being connected to the Smart Firefighter Project, but also in my role with the fire training directors, helping spearhead 2 assistance to firefighter grants that look at immersive learning and its technologies. And we'll be talking about that in a little bit. So Rachel has populated a poll that is showing up on the screen. And we're asking you, what is your primary role in the fire service? And by that, we mean the position. And we're asking, are you a chief, a training officer, a state academy instructor, a firefighter student, or other? So we're asking you to take a quick second to respond to that poll, and then as the results are tabulated and we have the final results, we'll share that with everybody. But it helps us understand our audience and who's concerned about this topic. So immersive learning is been defined a number of different ways, but Casey and I, through our research, did a number of focus groups. And one of the best definitions we heard about immersive learning is anytime you utilize more than 2 senses for the learner. And that was such a simple definition because we had seen these multi-sentence, multi-paragraph, multi-descriptors that were pretty complex, and really we were stuck trying to figure out, well, where does altered and augmented reality fit? And where does virtual reality fit? And where does hands-on simulation fit? Because that's immersive learning too. But that simple description that anytime you engage more than 2 senses in the learning experience, you're immersing the student, that kind of captured it. But it also aligned with what we were hearing from our focus groups in the fire service at large, that they viewed immersive learning not only as the technology driven with the use of augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, but the good old hands-on simulation training they were doing, the live fire training they were doing in 1403 approved burn buildings, and with the new generation of simulators for fire pump operation, emergency vehicle operation, and incident command skills. So that allowed us to take a little bit of a broader view as we did our research. In the course of this research, like I said, we had 2 AFG research projects. The first one we called the FILE project, which stood for the Firefighter Immersive Learning Environment. And in this project, we conducted a number of focus groups and a summit. And coming out of that summit and the result of the focus groups, Casey developed a SWOT analysis, which was one of the most useful tools coming out of this project. And it was designed to take the fire service roles and identify what they saw to be the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats posed by immersive learning. So Casey, I would kind of like to start with that look at the SWOT analysis to kind of put a framework to some of the discussion we're going to have today. So could you share that with us?
Yes, thanks, Ken. And so let me share my screen and I'll show you this SWOT table that we generated, which was very informative. And I assume you can see my screen right now.
That's correct, Casey. Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I'll note that this is a table in our first report on the FILE project, which is on the FPRF, Fire Protection Research Foundation website, as well as the NAFTE and other websites. So you do have this available. You can go look at it, and it does look complex, but honestly, it's relatively straightforward. So let me just explain this quickly. When we talk about SWOT, this is often used: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I assume you can see my arrow if I move my arrow on the screen. Can you see that, Ken?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah. So these columns, E, F, G, and H, when we did our focus groups, and the focus groups, we did them at multiple locations around the US, and really spent some time with in-depth questions, working with the people in the training environment, not only administration, not only tech providers, not only instructors, not only the students, incumbent, and rookies. It was everyone. And we made strong attempts to make sure we had all groups represented at these focus groups. But as you see, all this information in the gray, this is all the material that filtered out. These are the fish nets that came up on the pier and dumped everything on the pier. And this is what we had. So we organized it, and it was very revealing. And I do want to just point this out quickly to you, that it became very clear that we had the same questions, the same concerns over and over and over again from similar subgroups. And that's where we realized those subgroups really broke into these categories you see in columns A, B, and C, where we had administrative folks, not only at training academies, but also administration at fire departments. And that's these groups A1, A2, A3, and B1, excuse me, A1, A3, and B1. But also, we realized another key subgroup are those who were implementing the training materials, the instructors, and those who were providing the supporting infrastructure, like the curriculum developers, certification groups, et cetera. But we also clearly had the students, and they had a very different focus, and they had some very insightful feedback. And then, of course, a key group as well are those who are providing all this stuff, not only for the fire service in terms of technology, but for EMS, for the military, for everything out there in today's world. And there's a lot that's happening, and that's where we're looking over our shoulder and we realize, wow, there's quite a bit going on in some of these other disciplines and professions that we aren't necessarily enabling and utilizing and chasing the opportunities where we could be and should be. So that's where, that's been the underpinning of our research projects. But as you see, this column D is the key column. These were the key issues that shook out. And over again, we heard from the administrators, for instance, about cost. Cost is important, or reaching all the students, which for NVFC and especially smaller fire departments in rural areas or so forth, it's hard. You're limited resources, and there's some real value added here in terms of trying to reach people out in distant areas and so forth. So we clearly saw these issues play out. And I do want to just say the students and the instructors are a very key group, because the instructors, clearly there's times when it's like, well, what's in it for us? This is change, and it's hard. Change is hard. Why should we embrace this? Why would we look at some of this? And there are some clear pluses for that, such as documentation and automating everything. So there's minimal paperwork and documentation, for instance. But so we did hear from the students, and they were clearly saying, look, if you want us to really learn and really embrace it, make it fun, make it so it's deep on us and we remember it, and we'll think about it, and we'll do it on the weekends on our own time or whatever. And so, they were very clear on those points. So this is the SWOT table. A lot of information here. I don't know, Ken, if there's anything you feel that we should add, but clearly when we talk about strengths and weaknesses, columns E and F, those are what we see more at the moment today. And then opportunities and threats, that's more what we see in columns G and H tomorrow in the future. And again, personally, I see a lot of opportunities and strengths, and we're not utilizing them. And that's really where we want to think about for the future.
So one of the things we discovered when we started this project several years ago, the focus for what was thought to be immersive learning and new technology and training really was being driven a lot for a new training simulation that came out for live fire training. And it was a company that was being very aggressive in its marketing and had a product that they were out there promoting. It had been accepted over in Europe and by the Department of Defense and others, and they were trying to bring it into the American Fire Service. And it really generated a lot of discussion, as you can imagine, but a lot of thoughtful discussion. And if you notice on the SWOT table, there is a space that we talked about live fire training. And if we find that over in column D, and we go down to the yellow box at the bottom, the top line is live fire training. And if you go across, there's no question that if we were able to use technology as an adjunct tool to live fire training, it could be safer and minimize contamination exposure because of what we know about smoke and byproducts and heat. That contamination occurs whether it's a structure fire or a training fire. But then for the weakness, the lack of realism. And we had students who told us if we had fellow firefighters who were trained exclusively through a technology-driven tool and did not have hands-on fire experience, we don't know that we would trust them in a fire. We would not feel confident of their skills. And then we saw that, well, you know what the opportunity is, maybe this shouldn't be just focused on the firefighting aspect of it, but it could be used for pre-planning and for being able to go through target hazards within your first due district. And then lastly, the privatization of the tool. Could this tool be used for other non-training services, such as recruitment and retention, such as educating the public for community risk reduction activities? So I use that as an example because when this tool first came into the market several years ago and raised all these questions, to their credit, they've done a very good job of listening to the fire service, trying to address it, trying to adapt to the needs of the fire service. And we're beginning to see this across many of the tools that are currently being promoted. And one of our goals through these projects were to make the fire service a better consumer of immersive learning technologies so that they understood it. With that as my handoff to PJ, I'd like to invite PJ to tell us his journey at the Connecticut State Fire Academy, looking at immersive learning. He's got some very distinct applications, and how he leveraged immersive learning and other technology-based learning means to increase hands-on skill time at the Connecticut State Fire Academy. PJ?
Hey, Ken. Thanks for the opportunity today. I appreciate the chance to talk about what we're doing here in Connecticut. So as you mentioned, we are utilizing some technology within our programs here. And I became the director 3 years ago after retiring as Deputy Chief of Training from the Connecticut Department. You know, I definitely saw the outcome of training at the Connecticut Fire Academy, which was outstanding. But when I came here, we were faced with a shortage of firefighters, so our recruit firefighter program was growing, and we're receiving some complaints from chiefs that we're sending our recruits to you, and we're getting reports that they're standing around a lot, right? So they wanted to decrease the amount of time that they were actually here, because it's a 15-week, 600-hour program, but they also wanted better training. They wanted more hands-on training. And while we're still meeting the certification standard, but also teaching what we like to say jump seat ready firefighters. So we started really looking at our recruit program. This is where our endeavor started, and looking at what was the average age of our recruits and what is their learning style. And we found when we did our analysis then that our average recruit class age was 26 years old, and the preferred learning method was a blended educational model, so a combination of online as well as classroom. At that point, our recruit program was straight up classroom, PowerPoint driven, and then training ground, hands-on skills, learning, adaptation, and mastery. So in speaking to Jones and Bartlett Public Safety Group, we started investing and looking into the interactive lectures. So what we ended up creating is almost like a flipped classroom, where now our recruits are utilizing, I think it's 21, I think it's like 21 different chapters that they are required to do as homework prior to coming to the classroom. So they're getting some cognitive education through the interactive lectures. There's the mandatory skill checks. We know who's done it. We know how long that they've spent on there. So we have the ability to test them, quantify that they've received the training and what they've received, and decrease the amount of classroom time. This gained us we're up to like 34, 35 hours of less classroom time and more hands-on training time. So the concern that we had, as well as a lot of others, were what was our test scores going to be? If we're delivering less time in the classroom and we're not spending as much time educating them, where are we going to be? Our test scores now have consistently gone up utilizing this model. So we've decreased the amount of time we have recruits sitting in the classroom. We're leveraging their homework time on having a consistent homework model by utilizing the interactive lectures. They have more time out in the training grounds, and we've seen increased test scores. And we're educating them the way they learn of the current generational learning style of our recruits.
And PJ, you've coupled that with an initiative to start looking at some specific, more immersive learning technology, because what you've done is with that flipped classroom concept, you're engaging not only in the lecture driven, but in the learn at your own pace, at your time, on your own time concept. But now you're introducing the next phase, which I understand is those immersive learning tools, specifically the pump operator simulator and others. So could you talk about that in the process you went through to vet those technologies, how you're looking to apply them, and any takeaways you have from it so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll hit 3 points, but first I want to comment. I see Rob made a comment in the chat regarding my mic not being that great. I just switched over my microphone, so hopefully that's a little bit better for everybody. And I apologize. If anything that I covered you did not clearly get and you can't get from the recording, please feel free to reach out to me after this, and I'll be happy to talk with anybody that wants additional information. So yeah, Ken, so 3 areas that we also have some immersive training. You mentioned the FAAC pump simulator for our pump operations classes. That's new to the Academy. We're incorporating that into all of our pump operations classes to provide realistic pump training, where now we can actually put our pump operators that are going through our training programs through actual pump failures versus the normal pump training where you talk in theory about having pump failures. Take something like cavitation. No chief wants us to put their pumps into cavitation for an extended period of time because we can, ruin a pump very, very quickly, or a complete loss of water, right? There are emergency actions that we want to train our pump operators, but we've had to actually just talk about it. If this happens, you do this. Now with the pump simulator, we have the ability to actually put these pumps through failure and have those instructors work their way through those challenges. Our certifications division is also looking to begin utilizing the pump simulator for the certification testing piece of our pump operations classes. Currently, it's embedded testing. But if we can get them utilizing the pump simulator, we have a greater ability to have consistent training, but also consistent testing and certification process. Number 2, I'll chat with briefly is the Flame Simulator. So the Flame Simulator, the virtual reality simulator, is a great piece of equipment, a great tool for us on many, many different fronts. Primary use is the premier use that I missed originally. Now, Ken, we've talked about this when I first looked at the Flame Simulator, but where the premier usage is now is in recruitment events, public events, high schools, colleges, when we're trying to teach or educate or recruit those that are not in the fire service, but what the fire service is, to be able to put them in that immersive environment utilizing the Flame Simulator. They get a real upfront personal feel of what it's like to being a firefighter in multiple different scenarios. We also see an avenue for communication within the Flame Simulator for our new officers, but also within our recruit program for our new firefighters. Communication, size up, and then nozzle technique. And the third area where I also venture to say, immersive training is with our fire dynamics program. Being a FSRI fire dynamics instructor and one of their boot camp instructors, we've been able to deploy that entire model here at the Connecticut Fire Academy. So instead of that 4, 5, or 6 hour PowerPoint lesson on fire behavior, we've taken the fire behavior lesson and we've broken it out, and we put it within our different tactics. So we have fire behavior embedded with all of our tactics, but up front, we do a hands-on immersive training for fire dynamics. We do a candle lab. We do a pressure lab. We do live fire in flashover. We do live fire in a Connex box that's all on one plane. We do dollhouses. We do the alcohol prop. So we're taking that traditional boring PowerPoint lesson, and we get the recruits hands-on with candle experiments in the pressure lab, the dollhouse, the alcohol prop, to truly understand the fire behavior and the fire dynamics. So then when we get them into those live fire situations, we get them into those tactical situations, they can truly understand why door control is important. They could truly understand why water application in the proper way is truly important. So we've really, in the last 3 years, changed how we educate our recruits by identifying the generational learning and meet their needs, but also put them in hands-on situations so they can truly use their hands and they're not just stuck in a classroom.
PJ, just one of the points I heard is that you were using these immersive learning tools to break down some of the more complex skills into smaller units. And you mentioned the alcohol lab, the pressure lab, and whatnot. So not only are they getting the book knowledge, but then they're actually doing it with hands-on. And of course, if you see something, say something, touch something, you increase learning and retention and understanding by big factors. So it sounds like that's part of your philosophy, is not only using the tools for the capstone event, if you will, but also using it to reinforce learning at the basic components of a particular skill or knowledge set. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. The certification testing piece is extremely important, that when the recruits leave here, they're certified firefighters. However, we want to make sure that the recruits, when they leave here, they have a true understanding and they're jump seat ready, and they could go work in any community in Connecticut, whether they're going to a two firefighter engine company or a 4 firefighter engine company, that they have the knowledge and the ability to be they're jump seat ready and they can succeed in their role in their communities, which everything from extremely rural communities to inner cities in Connecticut.
Thank you. And folks that are listening, I want to remind you, if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. Rachel's going to monitor them and be sure that we address them before we conclude today's webinar. So Casey, I had mentioned early on about your work on the Smart Firefighting Project, and that was, I know it was at least several years ago. You can give us a better time frame. But can you give us a little background about that project and how that was kind of like one of those little seeds that got planted in fertile earth and has evolved to where the fire service is now beginning to talk about technology enablers, immersive learning, and in PPE and other areas?
Yeah. So, Ken, what you're referring to is the research roadmap for smart firefighting. And Rachel, you can put the link into the chat window. Anybody can download this or cruise through it. It's a couple hundred pages. But the National Institute of Standards and Technology did fund this effort, and it is a milestone report. It came out in May 2015, so it's about 10 years old even now. But it took several years to generate it, and it really is a very interesting work to try to get our hands around the entire fire service and everything that the fire service does, which isn't just fighting fires, as we all know. There's a lot going on here, and that's something to keep in mind as we talk about immersive learning as well. It's not just live fire training. And, Ken, you focused on that earlier in the SWAT table. That came up over and over and over again as if, that's the big threat. It's going to replace live fire training. Well, no, it's not. And, there's all these other uses of this that we're not clearly seeing. And that's one of the things that we were trying to address here. It's the vision in terms of where are we going? What are we doing? Now, we've already lived a lot of this. And I'll tell you, some of the things we were addressing way back 10, 15 years ago have really come to fruition already when we talk about computer-aided dispatch and a lot of things that we're doing today using Google Maps and in knowing where hydrants are located easily, and a lot of things that just were not available before. But when it comes to some of the technologies, and when we talk about training in the virtual reality, augmented reality, and other tools similar to that, that's where we see a lot of other disciplines really running forward and using a lot of this in different environments that we feel we want to do that too. We're missing the boat on some of these applications, and we feel it can really improve effectiveness and efficiency with our learning environment, in our training environment, and that's what we want to achieve. I do want to make one key point here. The research roadmap, it's got 22 chapters in it, and those 22 chapters, each of them had at least 2 co-authors, one of whom was a fire service oriented person, a fire chief or arson investigator or whoever it might be, linked up with a technology provider who knew the technology. They wrote those 22 chapters, and it's a mix of everything before a fire happens, during a fire when it's happening, and after a fire. And it's addressing getting all this data, processing the data, and then doing something with it. And those 22 chapters, where I'm going with this is there's a world of people out there. And I'm telling you, we did at least, I'm trying to remember how many workshops. One of them was in Palo Alto, California, in the shadows of the giants in Silicon Valley, and we were working directly with Google and directly with Microsoft and directly with Apple, and these incredibly huge organizations that have lots of resources, and then the many subgroups underneath them. They want to work with the fire service, but they don't understand it, and they want to work with us. And that's where we've been working hard to try to mesh this together. Just like we match the authors here, they want us to help them figure out how to address these applications. So the opportunities are there, and one of the important messages, especially for fire chiefs and people who have to pay for this, is they want to help. And so there's a lot of opportunity here that we'd like to really try to move forward. And that's one of the cruxes of our research projects today, which I know you're going to talk about, Ken.
Mm-hmm. That's a perfect segue, because that's where I'm going next, Casey. So as I had mentioned, the training directors, along with the Fire Protection Research Foundation and with Casey's support, we have embarked on 2 AFG funded grants. The first one was the Firefighter Immersive Learning Environment, or we referred to it as the FILE project. And the premise was we wanted to better understand what did firefighters need to be able to fully embrace immersive learning and understand the technology application. And as I shared with you, we did a number of focus groups. We had a summit. We've got a very exhaustive report that has the findings of the research, the literature review, the focus groups, the SWOT analysis, and also includes a roadmap for the fire service to look to the future of immersive learning technologies. But in this process, we had some very aha moments. One was immersive learning is much more than the technology-driven augmented reality, virtual reality, and whatnot. Number 2, the fire service has been doing immersive learning since the time it first started and had a drill school. You can go back and research and find pictures of firefighters jumping out of training towers into life nets from the early 1900s. Trust me, I've jumped out of a training tower into a life net. There's nothing more immersive than that experience. When you go out that window and you're hoping the net's underneath you, you are very much immersed in the learning. But to the point, this is not anything new for the fire service. It's just technology is an enabler to bring it to the next level. So our goal in that project was to lay the groundwork for the question, what should the focus of immersive learning technologies be? How can we assist in this transition from the technology providers, as Casey illustrated and talked about, to understand the fire service and to make the fire service a better consumer of these products? immersive learning technologies that rely on the technology aspect, AR, VR, and whatnot, they are not cheap. They are definitely not going to be found in every fire station for a number of reasons. The cost, certainly, the support system within the department to maintain and to utilize it properly, and then the willingness of the department to make that investment in an untested technology and hoping that it meets their needs. So we're trying to close some of that gap. Now, the training directors as an organization are, and if you were listening to what PJ has done, that's a great case study where they're utilizing their position as a central training resource to take these immersive technologies, fund them, institute them in the training program, and make them available to their members. And many training academies today are taking their pump simulators, their driving simulators, their SCBA mazes, their live fire burning props, and they're making them mobile. So they're making them available that you don't have to travel to a physical campus. It can come to you. We see that as a great opportunity to serve the needs of the volunteer fire service and those folks whose training has to realize that this is not their primary job, that training has to be flexible. It has to be time and content driven to meet their needs. But more importantly, it's got to be as convenient for them as possible to take the training and get the benefit of it. So the training directors as an organization are working to capitalize on that and better understand how can that happen, which leads us to our next AFG project, which is called the Train Project. In the Train Project, we took 3 immersive learning tools, the pump simulator, the driving simulator, and an incident command simulator, and we're doing a deep dive into how these function. And we have a researcher working with us, and we're trying to identify the human interface between the training and the learner to identify performance and benchmarks that then can help us understand, was competency being developed? Did learning take place? Because the real value of these tools has to be a learning outcome. Yes, we want them to be fun, but ultimately learning has to take place to achieve our goal of having a safe and properly trained firefighter. So this next project is working on that. We are working with Dr. Kate Capallo as our lead researcher. We're going to be doing a survey. We're going to be doing some focus groups. We're having a discussion, and in 2025, we will be having another day-and-a-half summit at the Illinois Fire Service Institute, looking at this to further our work in immersive learning technologies. So let's see, let me just check to see if we have any questions. And Rachel has put the link to some publications in the chat. So if there's things that have been mentioned and you want to know if you can get copies, the answer is yes. Everything's publicly available. We're happy to share it, and the links are in the chat. Let's talk, PJ and Casey, next about, we know where we've come from. We kind of talked about where we are. Well, let's look over the horizon. Let's cast that vision of what does the future look like for the fire service utilization of these technologies. And Casey, I'll pitch it to you first, because you're kind of the bridge from that visionary concept of over 10 years ago of what technology can do for us to now we've narrowed it down to learning. So let's talk a little bit about what does the future look like in your vision?
Well, sure. And it's an evolutionary process. It's happening very rapidly, as a lot of us can see, but it's how good is your imagination? How good is your vision? And I personally see so many opportunities here. And part of this is seeing them in other arenas, like the military or like EMS, or when my furnace person comes and they use augmented reality. It's not a training environment, but they're working on my furnace and they're using an earbud and they're talking to somebody with some goggles and they're, getting their instructions. So it's being used all over, and we want to use it here with the fire service. But I know some of the applications that I'm keen to see us really move forward with include things like scalability. And when we talk about scalability, it's doing what they do in the gaming industry, if you will, or the arcade kind of games that you can play, where you can play with other people around the world. Well, wait a minute, we want to have drills with firefighters, not one-on-one, but with entire companies, with entire departments, with multiple departments, and even regional, and have large-scale drills. The military is doing this all the time, and other groups are doing it, and we're not doing that. And firefighting is a team sport, so we definitely want to get that get going with that. I also just want to add, it's not just firefighting, and this was clear with the research roadmap, where they said, well, what else do you do besides put out fires in a house? And we said, firefighters do a lot. And that's where we get into things like tech rescue, and certainly EMS again. But I'll have to tell you, every year on average, there is one line of duty death in training. And that average has been going down in recent years, which is great because of the AFG efforts and so forth. But that's where we don't want that. And there's many injuries that occur. And I'm going to just say, and I'll use a volunteer fire department, watching the Cumberland, Maine Fire Department doing under ice rescue training. And it still makes, the hair on my back stand up thinking about it, because it's scary stuff. And how do we do this in an efficient and effective manner? There's nothing like doing the live thing, of course, but there's a lot of steps that we can do getting up to that. The last point I want to make is we're back to this issue of these other groups out there who want the fire service to help them, help us, help you. And there's groups, and I'll even throw an example, because they spoke at our conference for the FILE project. We had Tesla, who really is, they have battery energy storage systems, which are showing up everywhere. Well, they are promoting very hard virtual and augmented reality training for their systems, where they've been going in, and they recognize that when you have periodic, regular training required, where you really want everybody in the region to get it, not just the ones who are on duty that day, this is an effective way to really get that outreach. So they're promoting it, and they're funding it, and they're providing the resources to make it all happen. So that's another great example.
Thank you, Casey. And PJ, as we talk about the vision and the future, of course, that can't happen unless we have implementation of this technology. And you've been doing that at the Connecticut Fire Academy. So could you talk about not only what you see the future looks like, but what is the roadmap, the journey, if you will, to get this technology implemented? And then after we finish that, I see somebody asked a question if we'll show any examples of immersive learning. And we'll talk about some use case scenarios and some products that are out there, but we don't have any specific products or whatnot to show you today, but we will talk about some. PJ?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. So, I don't know where the future is going to be. There's one thing that I envision that I don't think is that far off, but, I think the biggest hurdle is funding, is in our command training. I would like the ability, and I foresee in the future, for my incident commanders to be able to come into an immersive room, and I can put them on any street or in their town or their city with their buildings. And every direction they look, they have their buildings, they have their companies, they have their fire trucks, and we have realistic scenarios. The virtual reality, the flame simulator is great. The technology is great, but it's still not there yet as far as perfect real world. You can still see the difference between virtual reality versus the real world. But we're getting there. We're making huge progress in the technology side of it. So I foresee the roadmap of getting forward is the technology increasing, us truly being able to put firefighters into every scenario that we train them in, to put them into a simulated environment first, very similar to fighter pilots. They don't get into a fighter pilot and start flying it around and figuring out how things work. They're spending thousands of hours in simulators first. Now, I don't foresee, nor would I advocate for, so please don't take this out of context, that we should be doing virtual reality or simulation training in place of live fire training. We still need live fire training. We still need that real training. But as Casey mentioned, we have a lot of injuries and we have occasional line of duty deaths related to training. We could probably mitigate some of those and reduce the risk of those by doing simulation training first, then moving to the live fire environment. So having that progression from simulations all the way through. This is our first week of recruit program. And, yesterday we're teaching recruits how to use rotary saws and chainsaws by cutting just a straight line. That's it. Because some of them have never even seen a rotary saw. Some of them have never held on to a chainsaw. There's an inherent safety factor built into that, right? If to the instructor, but also to them. If we had a really good way, which we don't yet, to utilize an immersive environment, the first time they touch that saw could be in a simulated environment. And then when we move them outside to do that same skill, it's going to be safer for them, but also safer for the instructors.
And could I add to what PJ is saying and even provide an example as was requested in the chat window? That this is where we see there's a place for all of this, and I too never see live fire training going away, but I see some various effective and efficient uses of this building up to that, and that's one of the issues. And Ken, you were talking about the latest project, really being clear on how we're building, and one step leads to another and leads to another, and where these really fit in. But just to go back to the request of an example today, I want to say our latest project, we have focused on what I'll call low-hanging fruit of where we see applications already. Driver training, we have simulators. That is virtual reality. And, already we're hearing from when we offered some of the examples on that, well, where can we go with this in the future? Two clear examples we heard from our focus groups. One is, give us our streets. We can see our streets when we go into Google Maps. Why can't we just have that blended in on the driver training and use our streets for our driver training? And so that was one clear request. And it's like, ooh, this is perfect for what we want to provide to the technology providers. Make it happen. And, there's people over there trying to do this now. The other is this scalability question. And, it was a question about, well, wait a minute, when I or whoever responds in the apparatus, I'm not responding alone. And if it's let's say a denser urban environment, there's a lot of cross traffic and people are racing to the scene and trying to be first due. And, and that's where we do have issues. So what happens when you have multiple apparatus and, or there's two in a row going down the road and the front apparatus slows down and pulls over, it's like, how does the one behind react? So on and so forth. So we want to make this interactive. So there's 5 drivers going at once to the same event and so forth.
And for some further examples, some of the tools we're seeing brought to the market today, and I had mentioned they use VR, virtual reality. Virtual reality is where everything in the headset is artificially created, either computer graphics or whatnot. So you, as the learner wearing the headset, are immersed in a virtual environment, but it's controlled by the computer and by the graphics. What we've seen with the Flame Trainer, they have added a vest that allows to simulate the weight of an SCBA. It allows to feel heat. It allows to feel pressure. They've added a nozzle with a hose connected to a reel that can simulate back pressure and resistance as you try to advance it. So this tool has evolved. It is mainly virtual reality. They have added the vest. They've added the hose. They now illustrate how you can use that to not only see and react by flowing water through the nozzle, but you can advance the hose line. You can feel the back pressure. You can feel the nozzle resistance. So they're increasing the immersion through the use of these technologies and these tools, which is a nice add-on. They're going to the next step, which PJ and Casey both talked about, of integrating communications and allowing for multiple users to be connected to the same incident, meaning that's going to create the ability for a fire company or a host team to be able to participate in the same virtual reality environment, working together to not only hone their individual skills, but to hone their coordination and their working in unison as a company. So that's one thing we see happening. Then we have augmented reality. Augmented reality is when you look through goggles at your current environment and there's an overlay, and in that overlay is a graphic interface that either shows you information, a hazard, or some other kind of circumstance that you need to react to and take some kind of action. And that's a step up. And that allows for introducing target hazards. It allows for introducing unique circumstances, these once in a lifetime type of incidents, but nonetheless, they present a danger to the firefighter. So you can take that once in a lifetime incident, like an energy storage system, for example, and through augmented reality in the goggles, you can have that inside your building in your town that you understand, you know, you're comfortable with, and you can play that scenario through in real time in a safe environment, but maximizing it being as realistic to you, the learner, in an area that you're comfortable with, and that's augmented reality. We're beginning to see some expansion of that. Now, two organizations that I know of that are providing free training utilizing these, and Casey mentioned Tesla, and Tesla will come out and help train firefighters, and they do it all through a virtual reality set with the headset. They will run you through their lithium-ion batteries, their fleet of electric vehicles, their energy storage systems, and their solar panels. And they provide a full range of training that you can get through them. The other one is Chemtrek. Chemtrek has several virtual, and they've just introduced augmented reality training programs to prepare responders for operating along the railroad right-of-ways with hazardous material and transportation incidents. So there's two organizations, and there are others who are doing it. The National Fire Sprinkler Association has some virtual reality training that's available. So as we see these technologies being utilized by these organizations who want to promote safety regarding a particular focus, it's becoming a great value to the fire service. And as I'd mentioned earlier, it's at little or no cost to the user. So that's a great resource. The other
Ken,
thing I'm sorry, go ahead, Casey.
Oh, I was just going to add to that. I thought if you're done.
Go ahead, please.
Well, yeah, and in addition to Chemtrek, this TransCare, I know, was doing it as well. And that was very significant. But I just want to, again, interject this example that a lot of people in the fire service are very familiar with. When we talk about augmented reality, it's heads-up displays. What you see out your SCBA face piece, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, wait a minute, why not put, how much air is still left in the tank or any other information? And that's where we clearly can see the use of augmented reality, and even, there's and the fire service has not really run with this yet, but the ability to change radio channels, and military's using this, just using augmented reality and what they call haptics and so forth. So there's a lot of this is being implemented, and it's spilling into the fire service, not necessarily in the learning environment yet, but in these other applications. We're seeing it all around us.
PJ, could you talk how in Connecticut you're using immersive learning to leverage training resources for the volunteer fire service? I know you have your physical academy and you work with regional academies as well. But could you talk a little bit about not only what you're doing, but how can the volunteer fire service in Connecticut connect with you? And I think that's a great example of how it can happen across the country in any state.
Yep. So as far as connection, we do all of our course registration through Acadis. So we build calendar classes across the state on regular intervals. But then we also contract with departments to host different training that we will custom build for them, depending on what their needs are. And as you mentioned earlier, going mobile, Volunteers in Connecticut don't have an abundance of volunteers, so they can't send 20 or 30 to the state academy and still protect their town at the same time. So making sure that we have good assets of training, a mobile training props that we can send across the country, across the state. Sorry, we have that SCBA maze that you mentioned. We recently purchased an all-in-one forcible entry Connex box training prop that I saw 2 years ago at the NAFTE conference. Increasing our cache of forcible entry doors, the VR simulator, the pump simulator, a ventilation trailer, increasing our mobile prop cache that we can send out across the state to help those volunteer departments and truly a mobile training environment, not just here at the academy. But if we could, Ken, I know we're getting close to the time that we're going to finish up. And while I have the floor for a second, I just want to throw this out there as far as some challenges. It's not easy to get to this level. There are challenges. And I want to give an example of the biggest challenge that we have here in Connecticut is investing in the most important piece of all of this, and that's the instructors. We could have all the great envisions to have this mobile training or to deliver this fire dynamics training or to use the VR simulator or the pump simulator, but getting the buy-in from the instructors to the technology or to the prop and getting them versed in understanding of how to utilize it properly to make sure that it's an effective learning environment has been the biggest challenge for us. Not necessarily the props, the ventilation props, the SCBA prop, talking more of the flame simulator and the FAC pump simulator, that true technology-driven piece. I have some instructors who have been very concerned about, learning the technology, being able to understand the technology, being able to troubleshoot it, because we know it's not going to be perfect, especially when we move off campus. So if you're thinking about going this direction, my number one advice to you is make sure you truly invest in the development of the instructors who are going to be utilizing this equipment and get their buy-in early so you don't spend all this money and have it just sitting on the shelf.
Thank you, PJ. The instructors are key in that human interaction. And one of the takeaways from our research to date, this technology may allow a student to learn independently, but there's always going to be a need for a human connection back to that learning experience, to measure performance, to mentor, to coach, to guide, to encourage, to go for optimal performance. So while these technologies are great enablers and they may allow independent learning, as PJ pointed out, there's always going to be a need for a human piece of that that's going to be provided by whoever is bringing the learning technology to you, whether it's owned by the department or the state academy. Very critical. A question was posted: is there options without the goggles for VR and AR, as some people can become sick in goggles in a virtual environment? So, and I'll also invite PJ and Casey to weigh in. I'm not aware of any alternatives at this point, except with the development of LED TV screens and full walls of TV projection and screens, we are seeing virtual environments created across entire wallscapes using these screens, like for incident command training and whatnot, for problem solving. We have heard with the emergency vehicle operator simulators, there are people who do get vertigo sensations from sitting in the seat with multiple screens and driving through the street. So that is an issue that's being looked at, and the people who understand the technology are talking about things like refresh rate and sensitivity to light and whatnot, and they're trying to fine tune it. But you are correct, Rob, in that question that there are people who are do experience not negative effects, if you will, of being involved in goggles and whatnot. Good question. PJ, did you have something?
Yeah, so firsthand experience on that, Rob. Over the last, 5 years, 6 years, as I get older, I guess, I'm starting to develop some car sickness in traffic situations or on some larger boats. That has not and does not affect me utilizing the Flame VR simulator. So I don't know if the technology is just getting much better and they're learning on how to improve that for us, or if it's just me. But if that's an experience that you've had, maybe try the new technology, because it may be an enhancement within the technology where it may not affect you or others any longer.
And if I could just add, we are not alone. This is an issue that all the professions, all the disciplines out there are looking at, and some with a great amount of attention. And it's, you know, this is more of an issue with virtual reality when we're fully immersed in some other environment instead of a mix of what we really see plus, you know, Pokemon or something put in there, whatever it might be that's added to that. So,
And Casey, help me out with this. Rob, what strikes me is the NFPA standard for a emergency vehicle operator training program has an annex. And the annex in that standard is a checklist if you're purchasing an emergency vehicle operator simulator. And one of the things it does ask is about the refresh rate and the other accommodations, the other technology specifications that can help minimize the that feeling of that vertigo type feeling, car sick feeling. And the last question from Don: the future is here, but small departments need help in obtaining VR simulators or any type of simulators. Absolutely. This is going to be, well, Donna, right now it is a challenge because it's not a market ready product. So they tend to be more expensive. But what we are seeing happening is as these do come to market, as they are utilized by more departments and training academies, ultimately it drives the prices down. And conversely, every time there's a new generation of microprocessor, computer chip, and other devices, they get put into the market, they're also driving the price down. So I think there's that technology adaptation curve. And as we see this become more of a product that's ready for the market, we're going to see the cost come down. And I think the other thing I would suggest is through the use of cloud computing and having the software for the simulator housed in a cloud computer sent via a stable internet connection to you, that could reduce a great part of the cost. So then your upfront expense is the goggles connecting to the cloud computing service. And that, I know that's an area that is under discussion. How does that look in the future? My thinking is that's going to help drive it down. So you'll have the cost of the goggles and then the software as a service cost to get connection, similar to what you might pay at home to get to the internet. And that may be one way we're going to address this in the future going forward. And we're just about out of time. So I'd like to thank Casey and PJ for sharing your knowledge and experience today. And for the folks who joined the call today, thank you for making time in your busy schedule to join us. We hope you join us on this journey to immersive learning. Take advantage of the links that were posted in the chat page. Look at the NVFC YouTube page, because at some point this recording, along with many others, will be posted there. And you'll be receiving your certificates from NVFC very soon. So thank you, everybody, and please stay safe. And thanks to the NVFC for hosting this opportunity for the roundtable.